So I guess we'll move on. We will move on to the next topic, the main dish of today, which is a US centric topic. Wow. I'm so excited for this one. So let's jump into it. So you might have watched, or you might have not watched, my recent little talk about how Ukrainian people boost Polish economy. I did this little sort of spiel, this little speech, we've read a little bit of an article which demonstrated that Ukrainian people have put more money into the Polish budget than was given to Ukrainian people from the budget to help them to provide social services and so on and so forth. And so I have sort of, in doing so, demonstrated, illustrated a clear cut case in which immigration has benefits on the economy and for the people that are already living in the country. For example, Poland has a big deficit when it comes to doctors. Ukrainian people are coming in and taking up those roles of doctors, for example. And it's also a clear cut example of how, when a state makes it easy for immigrants to get a job, for example, not demanding of immigrants to get a permit to work, it makes it creates good results because a lot more people much faster get a job, right? It's simple. It's pretty simple actually how that works. And now, unfortunately, even though it is pretty documented that overall immigration is a positive on economies, that actually when people go to a foreign country in order to build a better life for themselves, in order to get a job, in order to start a family, in order to start a new life, they will generally speaking be a positive for the economy. Even though that is the case, there is, I would call it, a global phenomenon of immigration and refugees alike being used as political tokens, usually for reactionary parties to gain votes. To gain votes when it comes to elections, usually to get into power. It has worked for a lot of countries in Europe, and it also seems to be a big strategy for Donald Trump in the current election. And there are, of course, you could say, universal arguments that are being levied against immigrants and also refugees, by extension, for that matter. And I guess you could say these branch out into two main sort of lines of argumentation. One is economical, and one is, I guess I will call it, criminal. So one whole branch is that, and that argumentation is used a lot more in um, that argumentation is a lot more used in Europe when the reactionary parties and a lot of people, okay, I'll say that once I say what the thing is. It is basically the argument that the refugees, immigrants, whatever you want, will come into the country, overwhelm social services, demand social services, that the state will try to sort of accommodate all these new people, give them an apartment, give them social services from which they will leech. They will not work, they will just siphon from the budget, and that the budget will collapse, that the immigrants will cause. the budget to collapse, and for the social services that are supposed to be for the people already living in the country also will collapse, and everything will just become worse for people because of those darn immigrants that just come to the countries to leech on the system. That's basically a very common line of argumentation within Europe. And what is really bad about this is that this line of argumentation actually gets this argumentation tracked not just with the core sort of electorate of usually those right wing movements. Those sort of actual arguments actually track with people that usually otherwise consider themselves pretty progressive on many things, which is a thing that is extremely unfortunate. That this immigration is a thing that depends on very sort of, I will use the term, it depends on the things that sort of to many people make sense on an intuitive level, and it takes a certain amount of getting into it more to sort of explain why certain things that are said about immigration and about refugees is not as it's portrayed to be, you know? And it is a fact that, an unfortunate fact, is that it's much easier to spread sort of this fear mongering. It is much easier to fear monger on a big scale than to calmly sit down with people and explain to them. You see, for example, we have this example of Ukrainian people that I gave. People still wrote in my comments that I don't understand that Ukraine people will just overwhelm social services, when in the video I've said clearly that Ukrainian people have put more into the budget than the government has given to Ukrainian people via social services. Right? So it's a much bigger job to sort of sit down with people and explain the sort of nuances, the economical nuances of how, uh, you know, immigrants can affect the economy and how the interaction works there. It's much harder than for politicians to say, yeah, those Ukrainians will just come here, they will collapse the system, they will just, they will leech on the system and they will just make things worse for all of you. Like, that's, there we go, I said it. That's it. You don't have to go into any more details. That's it. And that makes people afraid, that makes people nervous, and that will make even moderate people sort of think, I hate this party, I hate this politician when it comes to most things, but I'm sort of warming up on voting for them because it feels like they will have a policy when it comes to immigration that I sort of am favorable to, because of that fear that has been instilled. Does that make sense? Does any of that make sense? So that's one. This was one of those two pillars, right? Is the economical one of the. I don't know if it's used as much in the U.S. because I don't think that the social. I'm not even sure if their social services as robust in the U.S. as in the mentioned places in Europe. But the collapsing of the social systems is a common argument within Europe. The second argument that is, I'm pretty sure just universal across the board in the US, in Europe, and in many other places, is that refugees and um, immigrants will bring with themselves violence and crime. That's basically also a thing that is used across the board. That immigrants bring crime and violence, that they will just come and kill your family, rape your wife, and steal everything that you possess. That's basically the line. Especially when it comes to um, immigration of people that are not white. In which case, there's also, I guess, a third branch. I said two, but I guess a third branch has emerged, sort of. You know? The third branch, which is also a big argument that is being used in the US, is that the immigrants will flood the country and change the very makeup of it, which has, there's a name to this thing. It's called the Great Replacement Theory, basically. It basically alludes to the fact that a bunch of uh, people of color will flood the country and basically change the makeup of the country and change the nature of the country, therefore. And the implication is that the new nature of the country will, of course, be inferior to what is now. Right? That is the strong implication of this whole thing, that those people from those countries will just come and replace us and make things again worse. And it seems, yeah, basically, yeah. And it seems like in Donald Trump's campaign, a very strong element of it is, of course, fear mongering against immigrants, fear mongering against the crisis on the southern border, which, of course, for Trump is nothing new. He did run in the past on the slogan of building the wall, which is, of course, also the same thing, like that that Mexicans are basically rapists and murderers, and they had to be stopped from coming to the US, and so a wall needs to be built. And I don't know how that was supposed to work. Mexico was supposedly uh, to was supposedly expected to pay for it. you know so yeah, actually, that was a big part of Trump's campaign. Build a wall with Mexico. Yeah, of course. So let's take a look, because there are a few articles that I have here. I have an article here. So there's a reason. Um, there's a reason why I've been talking about this. How certain anti-immigration slogans actually go far beyond just the reactionary base, because it triggers certain intuitive fears in people on a certain intuitive level. Oh yeah, those people actually might be violent. Oh yeah, those people actually might cause the systems to collapse, the budget sort of to collapse. Oh yeah, the great replacement theory is usually reserved for the more a radical sort of voter base within a country. But those arguments of, hey, these people, these foreigners might actually be violent, and oh, these foreigners might just come here and live on welfare and drain the budget. Those are arguments that actually speak to fairly moderate people, because it just speaks to certain fears. And from my, by the way, I guess I can speak to some of my experience. From my experience, when it comes to people who are undocumented, because there's a lot of fear mongering about illegal immigration in the US, that illegal immigrants are somehow causing a disproportional amount of crime, which, as far as I know, studies have sort of disproven that. But based on my experiences in Poland, when it comes to undocumented immigrants, when it comes to illegal immigrants, I guess, what they want to do, first and foremost, are two things, okay? Which actually, the first one excludes committing crime totally, because the first thing that they want to do is to stay low, as low as possible, and to just, which makes sense. They're undocumented, so of course they will try to stay as low as possible and not draw attention to themselves as much as possible. And the other thing that they will try to do is, of course, to survive, to get some sort of a way to get money, to get some sort of a job. Usually, when it comes to undocumented immigrants in Poland, that is being done via existing local communities that will sort of allow these people to get some form of employment within the group, if that makes sense. Right? Usually, an undocumented person will, again, try to stay as sort of low as possible, and also to get some sort of employment to be able to survive. A third thing that some undocumented immigrants try to do is, of course, to become documented immigrants. That is also a thing that they will do on the side, sort of to try to find avenues through which they will be able to not be undocumented anymore, because they will not have to live in constant stress and fear of being deported. You know? So there's a certain just um, arguments that are just across the board universal, because they speak to certain base fears. And again, it's much easier to spread a misinformation, a simply packaged misinformation about a group, than to sit down and calmly explain why those things are not true, which is why those sort of that is why that sort of rhetoric spreads and is effective when it comes to gaining votes. You know? Does that make sense? It's just a rhetoric that takes a lot of time to combat. As with all misinformation, it's easy to spread it, but it takes a lot more time to sort of combat it. By the way, a lot of time illegal immigrants are first starting to be legal ones, and due to, for some reasons another, fail to maintain that status when renewal is necessary. So the idea that Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. For example, a classic case is that um, a person is has temporary sort of that a person's legal status depend on them having employment, they lose a job. That is a very classic case of people becoming illegal immigrants. Like you have a job, you lose your job, you're having problems finding a new job. In the meantime, your legal stay sort of expires and you cannot renew it because you don't have a job. That's a pretty clear cut classic case, isn't it? That's yeah, that's a pretty classic system of how people can lose their status. And of course, there was the infamous Polish visa scandal, in which the Polish law and justice government sort of scammed people. I'm just going to use that term, who wanted to get into Poland into possibly getting visas for $5,000. And then, for example, they would come to Poland expecting to be hired, and the person that was supposed to hire them would not even exist. So okay, let's look at let's look at the article. I've sort of built up a case. I've sort of built up a thing, and now we can get into it. Now we can get into the article proper. React. Why Trump's alarmist message on immigration may be resonating beyond his base. I was sort of making this whole intro because on the first hand, it might feel baffling as to why Trump's rhetoric on immigration may be resonating with not just with his fanatic base, but it just again it just touches upon certain universal fears. You know, that rhetoric usually just plays on emotions, plays on fears of people, of like they fear that they will lose their security, that they will be in danger, that they will lose their safety nets, their social services, stuff like that. Washington. The video shared by former President Donald Trump features horror movie music and footage of migrants purportedly entering the US from countries including Cameroon, Afghanistan, which was a big number of people trying to get into Poland via Belarus, and China. Shots of men with tattoos and videos of violent crime are set against close ups of people waving and wrapping themselves in American flags. They're coming by the thousands, Trump says in the video, posted on his social media site. We will secure our borders and we will restore sovereignty. See, this is like this the rhetoric of they will come by the thousands. It's basically an invasion. They are trying to replace us. They are bringing their crime, and sometimes the less white the immigrants are, the argument will become they are bringing their disease and many other things. In his speeches and online posts, Trump ramped up anti immigrant rhetoric as he seeks the White House a third time, casting migrants as dangerous criminals, poisoning the blood of America. So here we have the great replacement sort of mixed in, poisoning the blood of America. These people will, uh, basically, to put it bluntly, these people will come and disturb our racial makeup. That's basically what is being said here by poisoning the blood of America. Hitting the nation's deepest fault lines of race and national identity. His messaging often relies on falsehoods about migration, but it resonates with many of his core supporters going back a decade to when Build the Wall chants began to ring out at his rallies. You know? And it is extremely interesting and extremely baffling when it comes to the US, this rhetoric, considering that the United States of America is basically a country built on immigration. It's built by people that just left their countries in Europe or whatever to start a new life, to build a better life for themselves. That is basically what the US is built on. President Joe Biden and his allies discuss the border very differently. The Democrat portrays the situation as a policy dispute that Congress can fix and hits Republicans in Washington for backing away from a border security deal after facing criticism from Trump. But in a potentially worrying sign for Biden, Trump's message appears to be resonating with key elements of the Democratic coalition that Biden will need to win over this November. See, this is like the thing. This rhetoric of fear mongering against immigrants does work on people that in many ways consider themselves to be pretty moderate, because again, it speaks to many fears that people have: fear of not being safe, fear of losing certain social sort of services that they think should be for them, fear of losing their job to immigrants, fear of being attacked or mugged by immigrants. These are sort of things that, without calmly explaining the realities of certain situation, will really resonate with people. And again, it is much easier to spread fear mongering than to explain things to people, because fear mongering is fast, snappy, simple, and sort of explaining more nuanced positions takes time. And the people are also in a hurry in their everyday lives. Not everybody has time to sort of sit down with somebody else and discuss, oh, why actually the social systems will not necessarily collapse. Oh, why actually immigrants, especially illegal ones, are not all that eager to commit crime, especially violent crime, etc., etc. You know? No, that's not true. Actually, that's actually not true. We're low seven. That's actually the whole point. It doesn't just speak to their base. It's not just dumb to everyone else. That's the sad truth of the situation. It works. And unfortunately, it's not just a thing that works on a rabid, xenophobic base. Like, again, but in a potentially worrying sign for Biden, Trump's message appears to be resonating with key elements of the Democratic coalition that Biden will need to win over this November. Roughly two-thirds of Americans now disapprove of how Biden is handling border security, including about 4 in 10 Democrats. 55% of black adults and 73% of Hispanic adults, according to an Associated Press NORC Center for Public Affairs research poll conducted in March. A recent Pew Research Center poll found that 45% of Americans described the situation as a crisis, and by this situation I mean the southern border thing, while another 32% said it was a major problem. You see, it is not just, it goes beyond just the base. That's the main problem with this. And this next sentence is actually very important because it also conflates a few different things. Vetrus Boyce, a Chicago-based racial justice activist, was among those who expressed frustration with Biden's immigration policies and the city's approach as it tries to shelter newly arriving migrants. She argued Democrats should be focusing on economic investment in black communities, not newcomers. Do you see the problem here? Do you see the problem with this rhetoric? Like, the problem is, which is another little psychological trick that is often used on people, that things are seen as either or. A country can either invest in newly arrived immigrants, or it can only invest in the people already living here. You know? When in reality, you can have programs that address problems that people that have been already living here face, while also creating a friendly policy for immigrants. Those things are not mutually exclusive. It's not an either or situation. And this quote basically indicates that the person says the Democrats should be focusing on economic investment in black communities, not newcomers. Like, this is, in my opinion, maybe I'm wrong, maybe someone will correct me in the chat, but in my opinion, this is basically a very similar argument to the US should not be sending aid to Ukraine. It should not be focusing on helping people abroad, because instead we should be fighting homelessness, or we should be investing in schools. You know? In my mind, that's basically the same line of argumentation. Like, there's this one limited pool of money within the budget, and if it's spent here, then it cannot be that there's. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. They're sending us people who are starving the same way black people are starving in this country. They're sending us people who want to escape the conditions and come here for a better lifestyle, when the ones here are suffering and have been suffering for over 100 years, Boyce said. That recipe is a mixture for disaster. It's a disaster just waiting to happen. You know? It's just, I'm very disappointed to hear this sort of argumentation, because it misses the point. Like, it misses the whole point. It assumes that first of all, it actually assumes very naively, in my opinion, that if immigration was totally stopped, then the government would completely sort of laser focus on the problems of racial tensions in the US, on homelessness, on inequality of income, and just fix those things. Like, it's the same with Ukraine and aid. If only the US completely stopped aid, which, let's forget for a moment that aid is actually being stopped at the moment. If only the US would stop aid, then the US would surely focus its whole attention on domestic affairs and just fix them. Surely. Just like now, when aid to Ukraine is being blocked in the House of Representatives, that means that uh, the homelessness sort of index is falling by a few percent every single day. Every single day that aid to Ukraine is not being approved, more and more homeless people find housing and employment in the US. It is known. You know? Well, let's continue, I guess. Gracie Martinez is a 52-year-old Hispanic small business owner from Eagle Pass, Texas, the border town that Trump visited in February when he and Biden made some same-day trips to the state. Martinez said she once voted for former President Barack Obama and is still a Democrat, but now backs Trump mainly because of the border. It's terrible, she said. It's tons and tons of people, and they're giving them medical and money and phones. I've heard this, and I've heard about this. Apparently, the phones are some form of tracking system, but that's neither here nor there. She said, complaining those who went through the legal immigration systems are treated worse. Those illegals, they're treated so well, like royalty. They're the royalty of immigration, basically. Priscilla Hesles, 55, a teacher who lives in Eagle Pass, Texas, described the current situation as almost an overtaking that had changed the town. We don't know where they're hiding. We don't know where they've We don't know where they've infiltrated into, and where they are going to come out of. So do you see how this just basically caters to certain base fears? They're they're invading. They are infiltrating. They are just doing all these horrible things. You know? They're doing all these horrible things to us via infiltration that is so bad. You know? And that is just so bad that it's happening. I would like to see some statistics actually. Said Hessels, who said she used to take an evening walk to a local church, but stopped after she was shaken by an encounter with a group of men she alleged were migrants. Immigration will almost certainly be one of the central issues in November's election, with both sides spending the next 6 months trying to paint the other as wrong on border security. Wait! Hold on. No, statistics were given. Again, a recent Pew Research Center poll found that 45% of Americans described the situation as a crisis at the border, while another 32% said it was a major problem. That's a statistic for you. Roughly 2/3 of Americans now disapprove of how Biden is handling border security, including about 4 in 10 Democrats. 55% of black adults and 73% of Hispanic adults, according to an Associated Press NORC Center for Public Affairs research poll conducted in March. Wait, was there really a raid? If so, then thank you. Was there really a raid? Squid raid, thank you. We're talking about immigration right now and the fear mongering that's associated with it. We're reading an article. I did a whole bit before it about how immigration fear mongering is basically a global wide phenomenon. How more right-wing reactionary parties are using the rhetoric of creating an atmosphere of fear against immigrants to win elections. How unfortunately that sort of rhetoric speaks not only to the radical voter base, but also to many people that normally consider themselves quite sort of moderate on issues. Many people who consider themselves moderate or even progressive on many issues will onboard many sort of things about immigration, especially, for example, in Europe. A big example is that people will say those immigrants will come and just overwhelm our systems. They will overwhelm our social security. They will overwhelm our social services. That is a big talking point among sort of governments that try to win a re-election or win sort of parties that try to win an election. Also, hello, everybody. And also, of course, the very universal fear of refugees bringing with themselves crime. That is also a big fear-mongering point. And that brings us to the article that we are reading here. Why Trump's alarmist message on immigration may be resonating beyond his base. Hello. And we're basically discussing why that is. We're discussing why many people that consider themselves from moderate to even progressive will onboard many of talking points about immigration from people such as Trump, which is unfortunate. Like, immigration for many reactionary parties is the go-to sort of strategy to heighten the possibility of winning the election. In Poland, the Law and Justice Party sort of tried transphobia, and it just didn't track for some reason. Maybe there aren't as many transphobes in Poland as I assumed, because the Law and Justice just could not get any enthusiasm going about transphobia. And then they switched to immigration, and suddenly their numbers started seeing a very visible increase. So it's a topic that resonates with many, many people. Where were we? So here, immigration will almost certainly be one of the central issues in November's election, with both sides spending the next 6 months trying to paint the other as wrong on border security. The president's re-election campaign recently launched a 30 million ad campaign targeting Latino audiences in key swing states that includes a digital ad in English and Spanish highlighting Trump's past description of Mexican immigrants as criminals and rapists, which I guess it's also a legit way of sort of countering this sort of argumentation. And Trump just happens to be the person that says the most radical and, I mean, Mexican immigrants as criminals and rapists. it's basically he's just giving the argumentation. Usually, governments, when they try to be leverage immigration against their opponents, they will not just flat out say, "Oh, this group of people are criminals and rapists." They will fearmonger against those groups in far more subtle ways. Let's just say they will say, "Oh, this group of people does not necessarily fit into our culture. This may, cause tensions. This may cause increase in crime. This may cause this, that, or the other." They usually politicians, from what I know, don't just come out and say, "Oh yeah, that group, that's a bunch of criminals and rapists," you know? Usually that's not what happens usually. That is not the usual modus operandi of these sort of fear-mongering campaigns. The White House has also muled a series of exclusive actions that could drastically tighten immigration restrictions, effectively going around Congress after it failed to pass the bipartisan deal Biden endorsed. Trump is a fraud who is only out for himself, which is absolutely true. Trump is both a fraud and is actually looking out just for himself. So that is, both of these statements are actually correct, on point. Said Biden campaign spokesman Kevin Munoz. Kevin Munoz understands. "We will make sure voters know that this November." Trump will campaign Tuesday in Wisconsin and Michigan this week, where he is expected to again tear into Biden on immigration. His campaign said his event in the western Michigan city of Great Rapids will focus on what it alleged was Biden's border bloodbath. So again, focusing on crime, focusing on people being replaced. The great replacement theory is a big thing. Well, they're all out for themselves. That a platitude I ever had. That is a platitude if I ever heard one. That may be true under normal circumstances, alright? But I will make a case. I will actually make a case that in case of Trump, it is a special case of looking just for himself. Because normally, what politicians will do is I will look out for myself while playing within the system. And what Trump will do is, yeah, I will look out for myself by basically trying to demolish democracy, which is, in my opinion, a far more sort of dangerous form of simply looking out for yourself, if that makes sense. Like, it's also about how the looking out for yourself manifests in the world. If it's gonna be, "Oh, I'm just gonna sort of exist in the system, and when an opportunity sort of comes my way, I will use it to my advantage, and I will sort of, play within the system that exists, and, oh, I will ask my base to go to the capital and, I don't know, right? Or I will ask for the election to be sort of kind of made to be more in my favor." Like, there's a little bit of I feel there is a little bit of a difference there. The former president calls recent record high arrests for southwest border crossings an invasion orchestrated by Democrats to transform America's very makeup. So I guess the conspiracy, because there's no other way I could call it, the conspiracy theory here is that the Democratic Party is trying to bring in as much immigrants as possible to change the racial makeup of the US, because if the racial makeup of the US changes, then more people will vote for Democrats or something. That's basically the argumentation being made here. Trump accuses Biden of purposely allowing criminals and potential terrorists to enter the country unchecked. So, again, alluding to this sort of fear mongering tactic that is unfortunately universal across the world, that immigrants, especially undocumented immigrants, are all criminals that are just waiting. They're waiting in the lanes to get into the country and just start shooting everybody. That's just committing violent crimes, because that is exactly the goal that the immigrants have in their minds when they enter places like the US. It's not, I'm gonna build a better life for myself, I'm gonna get a job, possibly start a family if I don't have one yet. No, it's actually, I'm just gonna get in here and cause chaos. I'm just gonna get in here and cause chaos. Just that's the goal. That's the goal. That's the meme that I'm gonna do. Oh yeah, of course. And that is rich coming from Donald Trump himself. So Trump accuses Biden of purposely allowing criminals and potential terrorists to enter the country unchecked, going so far as to claim the president is engaged in a conspiracy to overthrow the United States of America, which I'm not even sure what that means. To overthrow the United States of America and what? Replace it with something else? Create a whole new country? Normally they don't drop the euphemisms. Well, they do now. Overthrow. That is really rich coming from Donald Trump, who does everything in his power to undermine democracy. That is really just fascinating to see. He also casts migrants, many of them women and children escaping poverty and violence, as poisoning the blood of America with drugs and disease. I told you, I've already told you this before. The less white the immigrating group is, the more likely that the argument against them will be that, of course, the classic one is like the cultures are inherently incompatible. But the second argument will be that these people, they will bring their diseases here. That's actually also one of the poisoning the blood of America. So it's poisoning the blood of America with drugs and disease and claimed some are not people. And of course, that is as well a thing that is unfortunately used across the board. It's not just a US thing, it's also very present in Europe. The treating immigrants, refugees, not as people, basically, but as chips, as political chips to sort of bargain when it comes to elections, when it comes to finding a group to demonize, to dehumanize. Basically, yeah, very often, unfortunately, and I am very sad to say that it's not something exclusive primarily to, it's not just something that extremely far right parties will do. Many even more moderate parties will play the dehumanize immigrants and refugees game if it means gaining some political leverage, unfortunately. Like for example, in Poland, there is a Polish-Belarusian border crisis. And last time I checked, even though the government changed from uh, the Law and Justice far-right party ruling Poland to a more center or even center-left leaning party coalition, the situation on the Polish-Belarusian border last time I checked has not improved significantly, has not improved much at all. So it's like, you know, unfortunately, immigration is a tool that is being used by many parties, many groups, many governments. Experts who study extremism warn against using dehumanizing language in describing migrants. There is no evidence that foreign governments are emptying their jails or mental asylums, as Trump says, which is, of course, this. I must admit, I've said already that there are certain pillars of argumentation that exist across the board globally that sort of just function when it comes to the discourse about immigration, and those are economic, they will overload their systems; crime, they will cause crime; and three, they will replace us. That's more prominent in the US than anywhere. But then we have Trump that says that actually foreign governments are emptying their jails and mental asylums to just send them to the US as immigrants, which at that point I just want to ask Donald Trump, what is your evidence of this? What is your evidence for that even happening? What a wild claim. But of course, this sort of thing feeds into the, you know, criminality pillar, sort of, kind of weirdly, in a twisted way. Like, what a theory. What a claim. Foreign governments are emptying their jails or mental asylums to send them to the US as immigrants. And while conservative news coverage has been dominated by several high-profile and heinous crimes allegedly committed by people in the country illegally, the latest FBI statistics show overall violent crime in the US dropped again last year, continuing a downward trend after a pandemic-era spike. Studies have also found that people living in the country illegally are far less likely than native-born Americans to have been arrested for violent drug and property crimes. And that makes perfect sense, because people that are in the country illegally will try to stand out as little as possible because nobody wants to get deported. They will just stay low and try to sort of survive. That is what usually illegal immigrants do. And of course, they will seek ways to become legal. That is also a thing that will happen. Certainly, the last several months have demonstrated a clear shift in political support, said Kirish O'Mara Vignariach, President and CEO of the Immigrants Resettlement Group, global refugee and a former Obama administration and State Department official. Hello, Vidalia. I think that relates to the rhetoric of the past several years, she said, and just this dynamic of being outmatched by a loud, extreme, or xenophobic rhetoric that hasn't been countered with reality and the facts on the ground. Like, because it's easy to spread misinformation, it's much harder to sort of counter it. It takes a lot more work and effort to do so. Part of what has made the border such a salient issue is that it impacts is being felt far from the border. Trump allies, most notably Texas Governor Greg Abbott, have used state-funded buses to send more than 100,000 migrants to Democratic-led cities like New York, Denver, and Chicago when Democrats will hold this summer's convention. While the program was initially dismissed as a publicity stunt, the influx has strained cities' budgets and left local leaders scrambling to provide emergency housing and medical care for new groups of migrants. See, this is what I mean when I say that immigrants are not treated as people. They're treated as chips, as political chips. You know? Who cares about their well-being? Who cares what their situation is? Who cares? We'll just create a destabilizing situation on purpose, using immigrants as, once again, chips, and all that in order to win elections, to gain power. How do you prefer to take donations? My preferred way of taking donations is for you to join this page, make an account, and donate to me through here, through my page. Because unlike any other place, Twitch, YouTube, etc., if you donate to me through the page, I get all of it. There is no middle org that takes a cut. So I guess I prefer to take donations that way. Thank you. If you decide to donate in any way to support this Polish channel, this channel of the biggest Polish trans Jewish creator. Local news coverage, meanwhile, has often been negative. Viewers have seen migrants blamed for everything, from a string of gang-related New Jersey robberies to burglary rings targeting retail stores in suburban Philadelphia to measles cases in part of Arizona and Illinois. You know? It's just fear-mongering. Fear-mongering that unfortunately people resonate with. Abbott has deployed the Texas National Guard to the border, placed concertina wire. Oh God. Abbott has deployed the Texas National Guard to the border, placed concertina wire along the parts of the Rio Grande in defiance of U.S. Supreme Court orders, and has argued his state should be able to enforce its own immigration laws, which has caused a whole bunch of trouble on its own. Some far-right internet sites have begun pointing to Abbott's actions as the first salvo in a coming civil war. And of course, when there's instability, because there's, of course, using immigrants themselves as chips, as I said, in political battles, in political games of radical, usually right-wing parties that want to win power. When there's instability like that, Russia comes into the picture, especially since destabilizing countries, spreading misinformation, spreading sort of this sort of atmosphere of tension is very good for Russia, because it sort of means, potentially from Russia's point of view, that let's say a civil war does happen in the US, well then, from Russia's point of view, that would mean that the US would be much less probable to support Ukraine against Russia. So that makes perfect sense. That Russia would sort of smell blood in the water, so to speak, and like a shark, and just swoop in to try to take advantage, right? And Russia has also helped spread and amplify misleading and incendiary content about US immigration and border security as part of its broader efforts to polarize Americans. Because of course, the more polarized uh, the US is, the more problems appear in house in the US, the less, the more distracted the US will be, and the less it will be able to focus on supporting Ukraine. A recent analysis by the firm Logically, which tracks Russian disinformation, found online influencers and social media accounts linked to the Kremlin have seized on the idea of a new civil war and efforts by states like Texas to secede from the Union. Right? Amy Cooter, who directs research at the Center of Terrorism, Extremism, and Counterterrorism at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies, worries the current wave of civil war attack will only increase as the election nears. So that's a whole other danger in itself. So far, it has generally been limited to far right message boards, but immigration is enough of a concern generally that its political potency is intensified, Cooter said. Because again, it really plays into the fears that people have, the base fears that people have about immigration. And it's not just the radical people. Non-extremist Americans are worried about this too. Oh, so the article just said what I said seconds ago. She said, it's about culture and perceptions about who is an American. In the meantime, there are people like Rudy Menchaca, an Eagle Pass bar owner who also works for a company that imports Corona beer from Mexico, and blamed the problems at the border for hurting business. And here, Menchaca is the kind of Hispanic voter Biden is counting on to back his re-election bid. The 27-year-old said he was never a fan of Trump's rhetoric and how he portrayed Hispanics and Mexicans. We're not at all like that, he said. But there's a but. And the but is about immigration fearmongering that got to this person. But he also said he was warming up to the idea of backing the former president because of the reality on the ground. I need those soldiers to be around if I have my business, Menchaca said of Texas forces dispatched to the border. The bad ones that come in could break in. See? Crime. Do you see what I mean? Do you see the sort of the picture that I'm sort of painting here? I'm a bit of an artist, so I do the metaphor of a picture, of painting a picture, if you will. You see the sort of what I'm basically trying to say is that immigration is this topic that is unfortunately used worldwide as a means for certain more extremist parties to gain power, to get into power. And unfortunately, it is a fact that it's far easier to spread misinformation, to spread lies about certain phenomenon, about certain groups of people, than to spread sort of corrections to this misinformation. And it also leads to more and more dehumanization of people themselves, of the immigrants and refugees. It leads to more draconian laws coming from nation states when it comes to immigrants. It leads to their dehumanization. It leads to them dying more and more. In fact, last year I have attended a special conference. It was held in the Polish Museum of Jewish History in Poland. Museum of Jewish History in Poland, Polin. And the conference was called The Wasted Lessons of the Holocaust, The Wasted Lessons of the Shoah. And one of the speakers on this conference was talking about the problems of refugee crises, the problems of immigration, the problems of dehumanizing refugees, the problems of the draconian policies against them. And the term that the person used to describe the whole phenomenon that is going on in many different countries at once right now is proto-genocide. Proto-genocide. The term refers to a situation in which the situation is very dire, people are already dying in many cases. It refers to when we have systems sort of in place, we have the structures prepared, we have all the infrastructure in place, and all it takes for the situation to become a full-fledged genocidal situation is for these already prepared and existing infrastructures, systems, and tools to be activated. Right? It's basically everything is ready. Everything is in place for a genocide to take place. All that needs to happen is for it to become activized. And the speaker on that event basically said that according to him, sadly, this situation will only get worse before it gets any better. So, yeah, that's basically all that I can say on this situation. That's basically all that I have to say on the immigration thing. And that's it. Thank you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for everything. And I guess, yes. Oh my gosh, Vidalia has donated $40. I hope you're able to get the work done that you need. So there is all we have. Thank you. Thank you.